Imagine waking up tomorrow to news alerts flooding your phone, nuclear sirens blaring across European cities, stock markets crashing globally within minutes, world leaders making emergency addresses. The Third World War has begun. This isn't science fiction. This is a scenario that military planners on both sides are actively preparing for right now. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're re-diving into one of the most dangerous scenarios facing our world right now. What would actually happen if Russia and NATO went to war? We're talking about a conflict that could involve 33 countries, over 5 million troops, thousands of nuclear weapons, and potentially the end of human civilization as we know it. The Ukraine war has brought us closer to this nightmare than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Every day, NATO weapons are killing Russian soldiers. Russian missiles are striking near NATO borders. One miscalculation, one accident, one rogue commander could trigger a chain reaction that spirals completely out of control. In this video, we'll break down the military capabilities of both sides, explore how such a war could start, examine what the battlefield would look like, discuss the terrifying nuclear dimension, and analyze what it would mean for the entire world. So let's get started. Historical context to understand where we are today. We need to go back to 1949 when NATO was founded as a defensive alliance against the Soviet Union. The core principle was simple: an attack on one member is an attack on all. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many Russians believed NATO would dissolve. But the opposite happened. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, NATO kept growing, absorbing former Soviet states. Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary joined first. Then came the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which literally border Russia. President Putin has repeatedly called NATO expansion the biggest threat to Russian security. From Moscow's perspective, this was the ultimate betrayal. The Ukraine crisis brought all these tensions to a breaking point. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. Then in February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion, partly justified by claiming it needed to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. Today, NATO countries are supplying Ukraine with billions in weapons, intelligence, and training. We're essentially seeing a proxy war that could turn into something much worse. Military COMPARISO, and let's talk numbers because understanding the military balance is crucial. Russia has approximately 1.15 million active military personnel, over 12,000 tanks, and around 4,000 aircraft including advanced fighters like the Su-57, but Russia's real trump card is its nuclear arsenal, roughly 5,889 nuclear warheads, the largest stockpile in the world. They've also developed hypersonic missiles like the Kinzhal that are extremely difficult to intercept. However, the Ukraine war has exposed serious Russian weaknesses: poor logistics, outdated equipment, low morale, and staggering losses. Russia has lost thousands of tanks and armored vehicles. Now, NATO collectively has over 3.5 million active military personnel across 32 member nations. Combined defense spending exceeds $1.3 trillion annually, about 15 times Russia's military budget. The United States is NATO's backbone. America has 11 aircraft carriers compared to Russia's one. The U.S. operates over 5,000 advanced aircraft, including F-35s, F-22s, and stealth bombers. American military technology is generally a generation ahead of Russian equivalents. Britain and France both have nuclear weapons. Germany has been rapidly increasing defense spending. Turkey has NATO's second-largest army. Poland has been building up forces specifically to counter Russia. NATO's advantages are clear: superior technology, overwhelming air and naval power, better training, and much greater industrial capacity. But Russia shouldn't be underestimated, especially on its own borders where it has geographical advantages and the will to use overwhelming force. How could this nightmare actually begin? The Baltic states are the most vulnerable. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are NATO members with significant Russian-speaking minorities. If Russia claimed these minorities were being persecuted, Putin might order rapid military intervention, gambling that NATO would respond with force over such small countries. Another scenario involves the Suwałki Gap, a 65-kilometer stretch between Poland and Lithuania. It's the only land corridor connecting the Baltic states to the rest of NATO. If Russia seized this corridor, the Baltics would be cut off. This could happen quickly, presenting NATO with a fait accompli. The Black Sea remains dangerous. An accidental collision, a shoot-down of an aircraft, or a misunderstood maneuver between NATO and Russian vessels could spark combat. Cyber warfare could also trigger shooting war. A massive Russian cyber attack that shut down power grids, hospitals, or financial systems in a NATO country might be considered an act of war under NATO's Article 5. The critical factor is NATO's Article 5. This states that an armed attack on one member is an attack on all. It's only been invoked once, after 9/11s, but if Russia attacked any NATO member, all 32 nations would theoretically be obligated to respond. This is what makes the situation so dangerous. The BATTLEFIALD if war erupted, the first 48 to 72 hours would be absolutely critical. Russia would launch massive missile strikes on NATO military bases, airfields, ports, and command centers across Eastern Europe. Simultaneously, Russian ground forces would pour into the Baltic states, aiming to capture them within days. Kaliningrad would become a major offensive base, bombarding Polish territory. NATO's immediate response would focus on air superiority. American F-35s and F-22s would engage Russian aircraft and destroy air defense systems. This air war would be intense and costly for both sides. The ground war in the Baltics and Poland would be brutal. Urban warfare in cities like Tallinn, Riga, and Vilnius would be devastating. Civilians would be caught in the crossfire. Russia might employ siege warfare and indiscriminate bombardment like in Syria and Ukraine. At sea, the Baltic and Black Sea would become war zones. Russian submarines would hunt NATO vessels while NATO tried to maintain supply lines. As the war progressed beyond the first week, NATO's superior resources would begin to matter. Reinforcements would pour in from across the Atlantic. American troops, equipment, and aircraft would arrive in massive numbers. But modern warfare is incredibly resource-intensive. The Ukraine war has shown that ammunition stocks deplete rapidly. Both sides would face shortages of precision missiles, artillery shells, and spare parts. Casualties would mount horrifically. We're talking tens of thousands of military deaths in the first weeks alone. Civilian casualties would be even higher, especially in occupied territories. The nuclear threat. Now we come to the most terrifying aspect, nuclear weapons. Russia's nuclear doctrine states they can use nuclear weapons if the existence of the state is threatened or if they are losing a conventional war. Given NATO's conventional superiority, this threshold could be reached quickly. The escalation ladder is frightening. It might start with Russia raising nuclear alert levels and making explicit threats. If that doesn't work, Russia might conduct a demonstration strike, detonating a nuclear weapon over an unpopulated area. This would be a signal, we're serious, back off. The next step would be tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield. Russia might use them against NATO troop concentrations, supply depots, or reinforcement routes. A tactical nuke might destroy an entire military base or wipe out a naval task force. This puts NATO in an impossible dilemma. If Russia uses a tactical nuke and NATO responds only conventionally, it might embolden Russia to use more, but if NATO responds with nuclear weapons, we're on the path to full-scale nuclear exchange. Strategic nuclear weapons target cities and populations. If the war escalated to this level, we're looking at civilization-ending consequences. Major cities could be hit within 30 minutes of launch. Millions would die. Instantly in the firewalls and blast waves, radiation would kill millions more. Medical systems would collapse. Supply chains would disintegrate. Then comes nuclear winter, smoke and debris blocking sunlight for years, causing global temperatures to plummet and agriculture to fail worldwide. We're talking about potential human extinction. Global CONSEQ even without nuclear weapons, a conventional Russia-NATO war would devastate the global economy. Europe would face immediate energy crisis. Russia supplies significant natural gas and oil to Europe. Energy prices would skyrocket globally. Industries would shut down, people would struggle to heat homes in winter. The global food system would collapse. Russia and Ukraine together export about 30% of the world's wheat. Within months, food prices would double or triple. Famine would hit the Middle East and Africa hardest, financial markets would crash spectacularly. Stock markets could lose 50 to 70% of their value. Banks would fail. International trade would grind to a halt. Unemployment would soar. The refugee crisis would dwarf anything in modern history. Tens of millions of Europeans would flee westward, overwhelming receiving countries. China's position would be critical. Would Beijing stay neutral, side with Russia, or try to mediate? China might take advantage of American distraction to move on Taiwan. For developing nations, this would be a disaster. They'd face food shortages, energy poverty, and economic collapse while being forced to choose sides. Can IT be PRV and TD despite all this doom and gloom? There are reasons to believe this war might not happen. The biggest factor is mutual assured destruction. Both sides understand that nuclear war has no winners. Russian leaders don't want to see Moscow turn to ash any more than Western leaders want their capitals destroyed. The economic costs are also prohibitive. A full NATO war would mean total economic isolation for Russia and economic devastation for the West. The Ukraine war has shown that Russia's military is far weaker than believed. Putin knows that without using nuclear weapons, Russia would lose a sustained conventional war against NATO. Diplomatic channels remain open. Back-channel communications continue between Moscow and Western capitals. Several countries like China, India, and Turkey could play mediator roles. Possible compromises exist. Russia wants security guarantees about NATO expansion. NATO wants recognition of sovereign nations' rights. Creative diplomacy might find middle ground. Perhaps Ukrainian neutrality with EU membership but not NATO. Historical lessons provide hope. The Cold War lasted over 40 years with multiple crises, yet direct Soviet war never happened. Leaders understood the stakes were too high. So what's the bottom line? A Russia-NATO war would be the most destructive conflict in human history. Even without nuclear weapons, it would kill millions and devastate the global economy. With nuclear weapons, it could end civilization. The good news is that this outcome isn't inevitable. The costs are so high that both sides have strong incentives to avoid direct conflict. But we can't be complacent. The current situation is dangerous. Accidents happen. Leaders miscalculate. The more NATO and Russian forces operate near each other, the higher the risk of incidents that spiral out of control. What can ordinary people do? Stay informed from reliable sources. Reject warmongering from any side. Support diplomatic efforts and leaders who prioritize peace. Understand that in the nuclear age there's no such thing as winning a war between major powers. The Cold War proved that even bitter rivals can coexist without direct warfare. What's needed now is the same strategic patience and willingness to manage competition without letting it explode into catastrophe. War between Russia and NATO isn't inevitable. But preventing it requires wisdom, restraint, and recognition that we all share one planet. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, please like, share, and subscribe for more content on international relations and global security. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Remember, peace isn't just the absence of war. It's the presence of justice, dialogue, and mutual respect between nations. Let's hope cooler heads prevail. Until next time, stay informed and stay hopeful.